Good day to all of you. Thank you for joining us for one more Living Lab and Data Hub seminar, a space for co-creation to present challenges and educational technologies that promote research in educational innovation. My name is Luis Eduardo Güemes, and I collaborate in the Living Lab and Data Hub of the Institute for the Future of Education of Tecnológico de Monterrey. This is why it's very pleasing for me to have the opportunity to join you in this first seminar of 2023. Today, I'm pleased to present the seminar entitled Multimodal Learning Analytics, which will be presented by Dr. Roberto Martinez Maldonado. Roberto Martinez Maldonado is a full-time lecturer and researcher at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. Prior to this position, he was a researcher and a lecturer in data visualization at the Connected Intelligence Center at the University of Technology of Sydney. Roberto studied computer engineering in Mérida, Yucatan. His research area includes human-computer interaction, learning analytics, artificial intelligence, and collaborative learning. In recent years, his research has focused on applying visualization and data mining techniques to help understand how people learn and collaborate in physical learning environments, such as classroom and teamwork simulators in healthcare. Now I invite Dr. Martinez Maldonado to take the microphone.
Gracias. Thank you. And thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of the very fun projects that we're doing. Thank you so much for the introduction, Luis. So as Luis mentioned, I have the honor to be in different lands, and they have this tradition I'm learning, and probably is something that connects and resonates a lot with us as Mexicans, which is the acknowledgement of country. Usually is done at the beginning of every talk, and we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we are. In my case, I'm in the land of the Yaluki Willam clan, the Boom people. And I would like also to acknowledge the land from where I'm from, which is Yucatan, the Maya country as well, and all the lands where you are. And talking into about culture before we dive deep into talking about multimodal learning analytics and collaboration analytics and all of that, I really like to take a hoax view first to try to see if things make sense when we start to talk about data. And I would like to start with talking about stories and how people we as humans have been learning and doing many things, learning new knowledge, passing knowledge from one generation towards the other by telling stories. This is the Yarning Circle. This is an Aboriginal, what is now called Australia, but it's an Aboriginal tradition, which is the elders sit with the kids and they tell stories on the sand. And that's very powerful. It's a good reminder that stories have power. And they have so much power that stories can also lead us to tell us the sometimes wrong stories, and we can believe them. So in education, there is this theory that has, by the way, been debunked. It's about learning styles that says that each individual has a learning style. So then education is to adapt according to that learning style. In the educational theory has been debunked. It has been demonstrated that that's not true. There are preferences and other stuff, but there is no style. That whole theory has been dismantled. But I've been finding that in the news, there's still still stories saying, well, this is not that. It's a little bit old now, 2020, the one on the left, where there's a story all about this wrong theory of learning styles. And on the right, The Guardian, 2021, 2 years ago, still talking about learning styles. So stories can tell us many, many things. Those things can be wrong. Some of those things can be right. But the stories are powerful. That's the way in which we communicate information. And there's a whole theory of how to tell a story. There is it starts with a plot, then raising a tension, then climax, and then there's a resolution. This is how humans have been evolving socially, regardless of where we are from. And in academia, because I know that so many of us are academics, we do the same. We have an introduction, we set the problem, then there is some action, we develop the study or whatever we want to explain, there's conclusions and discussion. We follow the same thing even in academia to communicate things. So when we talk about data, why we shouldn't be talking about storytelling? Well, it's happening. This is a very interesting book. It provides lots of book chapters that talk about data-driven storytelling. There is a whole new movement, in information visualization that talks about telling stories from data. So that's very interesting, and it's something that I believe we can also embrace some of these teachings when we talk about communicating data to end users. This is an example of some of the things I initially started to do when I did my PhD a few years ago here in Sydney. And it was presenting a kind of dashboard to a teacher in the physical space. I wouldn't call it multimodal back then, but there was a little bit of multimodality there. There was information coming from this massive interactive tabletop. So you can see in the back, the kids were around, and there was an actual class. And there was some information coming from the logs of the tables, some information coming from a Kinect, and to knowing who's doing what. It was really cool stuff. It was really new. I didn't know it was Learn Analytics, but and I took the risk without knowing that we were showing something to the teacher, and not necessarily was telling stories. This is just a dashboard, and this is another example. We can find dashboards everywhere now. Lots of charts here and there, and analytics, and we sometimes call these, these are analytics, and maybe this is going to revolutionize education, right? Like that's the hypothesis or the tenet, and why so many institutions are getting dashboards like this. And I chose this example just randomly because I really like the design. But I've been checking all the literature reviews of data storytelling since 2017, one after the other, most of them having focused on student-facing dashboards, not many about teacher-facing dashboards, but they all conclude the same thing. Dashboards are sometimes hard to interpret. It's hard to do something useful for learning. Teachers also find it a bit hard because you sometimes they're in a different interface, and how to translate from numbers to something, to actions, to pedagogical interventions, to changes in behaviors. And most recently, last year, there is also a lack of consideration of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So there is a bunch of things related to the design of these dashboards that are opportunities for research. And I think opportunities are also in terms of development, or many things that can be done around the design of these dashboards. So is a ripe opportunity, I guess. And I would like to also explain, a little bit about Learn Analytics. So what is the ideal Learn Analytics loop, and potentially start to figure out how these problems in dashboards are linked with data storytelling. So from a HCI point of view, we have the learner as a user, learner or teacher, but let's just pick one, and it's the learner maybe is interacting with the computer, different digital devices. We collect data, we generate analytics, and we provide something. And many times we immediately think about a dashboard. We make that design commitment. And sometimes a dashboard is also for educators, and the user can also interact with other learners. And then somehow this is going to support learning. That's sometimes a very technology-focused point of view. However, nowadays, there's more research, especially in Learn Analytics community, that are starting to see other things. They're starting to see that the learner is so complex that it's really hard just to say, learner 1, 2, and 3, because each of the learners, they don't have learning styles, but they have motivations, feeling, learning dispositions, personal challenges, worldviews, many different things, and that are going to affect the interaction with these dashboards or any other tools. And that has been demonstrated, for example, in the LALA project, the Learn Analytics in Latin America project, very aligned to our context, thinking about Mexico, which the project was to bring tools developed in Europe into the context of Latin America. And what it was found, it was like, oh, well, the context is different. So there's so many things need to be changed because there were so many assumptions in the design. So there's complexity here. And when we talk about different learners, we talk about collaboration, then we multiply that by all these interactions between the learners, and then we have the educators, and they have the learning design. So the context is really important. So that's also being acknowledged that now is really hard to create just one tool, a learning analytics tool that is going to work with all these different units or in different universities. And it's rather now we need to think about what are the contextual characteristics that may these data tools to support. And that's the question: how do students and educators, if they have a problem that can be addressed with data? It's not all of them are going to be solved with data. So then this learning analytics tool is a bit different, more complex. We have meaning as well, not only the data, but what is the meaning of that data for that context? And then we have analytics, and then the question is, how do we bring something back? And the tenet or the proposal is, well, let's think about data stories. How can we support this learning through storytelling, which is what humans are good at, rather than think in terms of facts. And this is one quote I really like: humans think in stories rather than in facts, numbers, or equations, by Yuval Harari. And actually, he has been writing about AI a few years ago, and it's kind of almost predicting what we are having now with all these AI tools impacting education in different ways. So this was the really quick introduction, very high level, and then now let's go through how we're doing different things to address all this complexity from different points of view and bring in different lenses. So the first one is human-centeredness. We were talking about the complexity of the learners, complexity of educators. So this is not something new. There has been in human-centered design, there are different disciplines, participatory design, co-design, that understand that complexity and the need for engaging with all the stakeholders in order to design something that is useful for them. In learning analytics, there is this also relatively new idea of creating human-centered learning analytics, bringing this human-centeredness to identify the critical stakeholders, not only the student, but maybe if we're going to build something for the student, we need to also consider the teacher and the context, all those relationships. And there is, it started to be feeling like a little sub area. And with human-centeredness, we make a very big differentiation compared to user-centered design. User-centered design, I'm taking this from the Co-Creation and New Landscapes of Design paper, which is very interesting. Paper to just understand what's co-design, co-creation. We have the researcher, we can bring some theory, we look at the user or the learner, we get some insights, and then potentially we build the tool, right? That's kind of the typical process. And we can say it's user-centered because we are observing the user. But with co-creation, co-design, participatory design practices, in different ways, they try to bring the user, the learner, the teacher at the same level of decision-making. This is really hard. Bringing the researcher, designers, users, and really letting them make decisions and getting the commitment for them also to bring the time and have the space to co-create something, especially learn analytics and data and talk about data, is really challenging, but is exciting, and some researchers are starting to do that. And that's aligned with also talking about collaborative learning per se, which is the title of the talk. Pierre Tuniking in the CSCL, he was talking now some years ago, 4 years ago, that learners shouldn't be seen as beneficiaries of this superior control entity for learn analytics, not just to bring the data and that's it. So I feel this is a very strong opportunity, especially for emerging research, to make it social, so more like social learn analytics. This is some work that I would like to describe. This is from a former student, Carlos, actually from Mexico. and he finished his PhD a couple of years ago. He was bringing the design thinking framework into Learn Analytics, one of the first ones actually, to co-design Learn Analytics with learners. And well, I use this slide just to start to also disentangle the process. We have a step of understanding, creation, delivery, and he proposed to have also this support throughout the whole process. So at the beginning, we can apply different techniques to understand. There's several techniques that we can apply in co-design, generative tools in design, not generative AI, but generative tools that, in this case, we apply card sorting for the teachers to generate to identify what are the questions. These are pre-service teachers. They are the ones that are studying, and they still have practices, but they were thinking about, okay, if I'm in the classroom, what are my real problems? And yeah, half of them are not related with data. That's not a brainer. And we have other tools as well that we apply with students, and I'm just going to go through some of them. This one is a user journey mapping that's coming from marketing. Usually they use that, like how the user go in a store and start to design that experience. So we apply that in learning. So it's how the learner is going through. This is an actual classroom. You can see there that's not a bathroom sign. Is a simulation room, and there are different mannequins. Like this is like a little hospital simulator, and I will show some images later. So we wanted to identify what were the opportunities to provide some kind of support. What were the pain points of students? Then in terms of creation, there is also a bunch of different techniques to prototype. This is one very low fidelity prototyping that we apply with teachers and also students, and then we try to find affinity in what they were doing. And we also have some cards that can scaffold the conversations and bring together. This was for a different project, but we were bringing together in the same table students, teachers, specialists in learning analytics, so they could start talking both about what were the needs and also feasibility and time and money. So it was a little kind of like a little board game to ideate potential big solutions. And then there is the actual prototyping with teachers and delivering something. This is research not from us, it's from Ken Holstein in CMU, but they were doing something similar, doing lots of prototyping before rolling out. This was a prototype of an AR, augmented reality teaching tool with lots of ideation and monitoring a dashboard on one of these augmented reality glasses. I don't think it was actually implemented in the end, but it was good to start to ideate and see how things could look like. And we did something more like low fidelity and actual realistically, which was actually deploying some dashboard. I'm going to show them later to teachers and scaffold reflective activities and so on. Something that we haven't done much is about the support and how to make this sustainable, which is really hard. And one proposal that this was led by a PhD student, so still hasn't been proven. But one idea was to bring design-based research cycles, which design-based research is a methodology widely used in educational technology research. So this is something that is already being done by educational researchers. So the idea was why we don't build a co-design cycle in each DBR iteration. And this is something that was done. It hasn't taken up, but I think it's a good idea. And these are just some ideas about how to bring human-centeredness into learning analytics. So what does this have to do with multimodality? So let's now connect that with all that design that can be done. We did some of that. And now we know that humans and all the learners are using different devices. They are interacting with each other face-to-face in complex situations, and each complex situation is very different. So one of those situations is this one I was just briefly mentioning. Now you can see it is one in which we have tested in different scenarios, but this is one of my favorite ones, where a team of 4 students enter into a room. It's like an escape room or something like that. It's a simulator of a hospital ward, and they need to figure out what is out of these 4 patients that are being mimicked by these mannequins, which one is the one that requires more help. And there is a glass, a mirror where the teaching team is, and it's like this is a scenario in which things can be manipulated. I just listen a little bit of noise and I'm getting distracted from this video. But you got the idea. The team pretty much needs to interact with all the different artifacts in the space. They need to move and also interact with themselves. They need to talk, and they need to be very effective, and they have only 10-15 minutes, and that's it. They need to solve the problem. So when we start to see these kind of scenarios, by the way, there are training scenarios in different situations, but kind of we just chose this one because it seems that is good for the for people and for to train nurses. But we felt like this was an opportunity for multimodal learning analytics. The idea of multimodal learning analytics originally is to de-emphasize the computer screen as the primary form or object of interaction. I agree that there's also multimodal learning analytics, and we were just talking before that I understand you're also doing some multimodal learning analytics in front of a computer. That's also very interesting. It's just different flavors and different contexts, and depending on the context, different sensors make sense. For example, we were using localization sensors because in our scenarios there's mobility, but if the student is not moving, then there's no reason why to use that. Physiological wristbands make sense to know if the nurses were aroused or stressed or not. And it seems that microphones are always needed there. And actually, we conducted a systematic literature review about the sustainability of multimodal learning analytics. And one of students found out that video and audio are the main devices that are used in multimodal learning analytics. Biometrics and digital pens, eye trackers, location movement, they're very punctual. So it's very interesting just to see that potentially the opportunities for sustainability, scalability are in exploiting video and audio. Now we have strong AI for doing analysis of video and audio. So that's very interesting. But nonetheless, there is lots of complexity, even if we're just looking at video and audio. If we look at wristbands, these are the Empathic A4. They have 4 or 5 sensors, and this is what we see. This is the raw data. There's lots of information here. We have the audio streams. Each student has audio, and audio opens up a lot of complexity there. We also have location. This is an example. It's not raw data, but you can imagine these sensors provide X, Y, so it's positions around the bed in the classroom, plus rotation. Some sensors provide that, which is very interesting. You can see all different nurses and how they were moving around one bed and the teacher. And we also can have system logs, observation logs, so we can have human logs, especially in these kind of scenarios. In the classroom, probably that's not a good idea. No one is going to be taking logs, but in scenarios that are more like, in this case, intensive and it's teamwork, and there is someone usually making notes anyway. So when learning analytics comes, it's like, oh, we can just have that pair with the other data. And now the problem is, how do we bring those data into a higher level that can help learning? So this is another former student who devised a human-centered, theory-driven approach to map from constructs, from higher level constructs to data that we can collect from multimodal information. So the first pass was an inductive mapping, which was consisted in asking the teachers, okay, if you want to assess teamwork, how do you assess teamwork? Well, you look at communication or speaker interaction, and there are lots of holes. So what she did was to bring another step where she wrote theory to map, okay, teamwork is not only communication, it's also active participation. We can get the verbal participation from the microphones, and the team positioning as well tells something about the participation, because different roles have to be in different parts of the bed and so on. So it's start to map, trying to map what data can lead us to certain higher order constructs. And it seems that this is an interesting approach to resolve that question of, okay, what data is useful and for what purpose, and what educational constructs we can put together. A follow-up scenario was, okay, if we have all this data, then how do we get actual useful insights from it? So we came up with this very basic multimodal matrix approach, which is handy, which is inspired on quantitative ethnography, which is also quite recent approach, which aims to bring ethnography, the ethnographic practices, and also the learning analytics and, well, data analytics together. So the idea is to code quantitative data in the same way as ethnographers code speech data and observations. So they bring this coding, the actual coding is the most important part. And for multimodal data, so the idea is to bring all this sensor data into ones and zeros, or something that is more discrete. And I'm going to present an example. This is just too much. So let's start with X and Y data. X and Y data is just that. It's just two numbers. And then you get a point in the room. And if it's calibrated, we know where that point is, and we can map it. But something that's more important is to know if a student is in the bed head, when, if it is on the next to the patient, or around the patient, or next to the trolley of the medicine, or is next door fetching the IV fluids, and or is just observing there for a long time, or that's more important, because then with that information, the teacher could see, and okay, you spend most of the time fetching the medicine. What was there? What was the problem? So how can we solve that? So this is a higher level, and we map that into ones and zeros, so we know where each people is at any time. And we apply the same principle for physical intensity. We got the accelerometers, but what is that information? It's 3 accelerometer axes. Oh, we can get always a high activity, low activity for this particular scenario, or synchronized CPR. And if the CPR was important, then that activity would be relevant. And the same thing with arousal peaks from electrodermal activity. Is there a peak or not? And key actions, speech acts, whatever is important. Is the person listening? Is it speaking at the very least? Or is he talking about something? And here, whatever we put in the columns is their codes, whatever is important. It can be anything. And I'm going to go back to the codes later on. So the idea is that now we can map everything to ones and zeros, and we know concurrently what's happening in the scenario. So the next level is, once we have that modeling, is how to tell the stories. So I like this idea of storytelling because it's bringing visualization, narrative, and data together. So it's just focusing on whatever is needed. And I present this because it's an example of how I learned data storytelling. This is I learned from this book from Netflix. She was a developer originally. Well, she worked with Google, and then she just realized, okay, this storytelling should be shared with every professional. And she put this example actually in the educational context. Imagine you see these visualizations, and these are the survey results from summer learning program, before and after. And what's the insight? It takes a bit of time to digest. First, you need to read all the legends, and it's like, oh, that 40 looks bigger, and then it got lower. So the okay got lower, and then start to see lots of happening comparisons. This is not the most effective way to present the story, because you're inviting the user to do a little analysis in the mind. And this is very simple data, very, very simple. A different would be to a text that explains. Before the program, the majority of children felt just okay, and the color has that making that work of, hey, look at the orange. And then more children were kind of interested and excited. So the pilot program was a success. There's text here and explanations really quickly. It's just most faster to identify the insight. And you can use different ways to represent the same data, text here, there, or just have text that presents the data. So there are different ways in which this can be done. We're exploring some of those ways. I just wanted to highlight one of the examples in which some of these principles start to be put together. This was it's another project from Zoom. It's called Zoom Sense. And this student, Stanislav, created a dashboard that incorporates some of these elements of data storytelling. We remove all the colors, all these spaghetti, confetti colors of the dashboard, and we use color just sparingly, just here and there, yellow or orange to highlight something that's important. So in which room I have spent, breakout room, I have spent the least time. So at group 3, I immediately see it and I can go to that as if I would be a teacher. So that's one of the examples. But let's go back to the example of nursing. So once we have all that data model, in this case is mostly actions, we could put all those actions performed by each student. In this case is 4 students, RN1, which is registered nurse 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, the 4th one is another role of like a doctor. And we have all these data points. So we showed this to the students and they were like, okay, they start to analyze the data. It's like, okay, I did this, I did that, and my friend did that. And we have these vertical actions, which are critical points, things that happen to the patient. And what we decided was to use a data storytelling approach, create some rule-based algorithm that would automatically assess the timeliness and order of these actions. And we ended up with the teacher designed 4 learning outcomes. And based on each outcome, there will be a story. And we created this interface, and I was actually, they could tap on the vital signs assessment as well as of the objectives. And automatically, the algorithm, which was not sophisticated, just simply comparing, in this case, if vital signs were checked every 10 minutes, I think. And if we didn't find it, then different text would appear. And this was a critical event. It was administering the IV antibiotic. Then there was an immediate reaction of the patient, and they had to stop it within, I think it was 10 minutes, 5 minutes or something. And they did it well. So it's like, okay, well done. So it's not always highlighting things that are bad, but in this case, they forgot to do an ECG in that period. So, hey, next time you need to do it. So the idea was to present this to the student after their activity, and so they would reflect on the errors they made. And also the arousal, the wristband data was also processed. And instead of showing data points or all these time series, the students wouldn't even look at it. We processed it in a way that we could explain it in words at the top. There were several arousal peaks. RN2 presented few arousal peaks, where this happened, and this would invite conversation about stress, how they were feeling during the simulation, which is very important for this particular context. In more recently, and I'm just going to go to now other examples, so we can start to wrap up. This is another example. We did this very recently, where we started to present this information immediately after. Like before, we were doing lots of prototyping, and there was lots of data analysis done. And then a week after, we were inviting the students, because this multimodal data, to be accessible in real time, there's so many technical issues. We've been solving them after a few years. And now we can present this immediately after. And these teachers are starting to use it. In this case was speech data synchronized with location. So in this map on the red, you can see it's 2 students, and where there is color, it means that they were talking. So they were talking with either the patient or with other students, and we were presenting other visualizations. But the idea is that we started to create these tools that resemble a dashboard, but we call it more like a reflection tool that the teacher can use to guide reflection after the simulation. And something that Luis and I were talking before, this chat was about the content of the conversation. Here is, in this particular scenario, but it's similar to other educational scenarios, there is lots of things going on, lots of things being said that are really important. And what we are aiming is to use the positioning and the content of the speech to start coding and understanding what things are being said, what is the content of the conversation in the different spaces. So here just a visual example just to understand, like if we have a coding scheme similar to what the ethnographers do, they bring their code book. And in this case, we use a code book for teamwork. So some of the codes were information sharing, situation assessment, agreement, and task allocation. Ideally, we want to do all of this automatically because this is what we can do afterwards. We apply epistemic network analysis, which is a network approach, which is very trendy now in educational technologies, learning analytics, for analyzing this kind of data. In this case, each node in the network is a code. We're talking about codes before. This is the ultimate goal. So we have all the transcriptions. For this particular data, we use AI human transcription, but there was a human fixing all the issues. Because this was 2 years ago, and there was no technology change. Now the transcription is much better. But for now, there was human transcription and then human coding. And the coding was identifying if what the student is saying is agreement, is information sharing, task allocation, disagreement, escalation. And we get all that data coded across several instances. And some of those teams were deemed to be low effective, and some were high effective in terms of teamwork by the teacher. So we have two groups, and these networks present the differences. These are subtraction networks, present the differences in connections between those codes, between high and low teams in terms of teamwork, high effective or low effective teams. The ones in blue are the high effective, and the ones in red are the low effective. And we also have these networks generated according to the space. So bed 4 is as you see the little diagram in the middle, we extracted that network from that bed because that was the primary task. That was the bed of the patient that needed more help. So we can now get the difference of conversation between the high effective and low effective teams in that position. And what we found, if you see the connections between blue, it means that they were talking, the high effective teams were talking, were doing information requesting, then information sharing. So there was lots of, okay, one person requests something, the other person shares something or respond to that request. You have that triangle there, and there's agreement. So there's lots of information being passed. While if you see the lines in red, they are connecting the nodes, the codes related with task allocation, planning, agreement. They were planning in the position where they should be focusing on the patient and finding more information. So we found out that was a really interesting thing that will be useful for the teacher. This is not yet for the teacher, but in the future iterations, that will be useful for the teachers to know and give feedback to these students that if they're performing poorly, maybe they should be task allocation much faster and effective than being discussing for so long next to the patient on planning and task allocation. The secondary task in the other beds, we have also we only see red edges, red lines, because those are the main differences with the high effective teams. Those students were doing information sharing, task allocation, information requesting, but the blue teams, which are the high effective, they were not focusing on anything specific. There was no big difference or something that would make them. They were just doing the work pretty much, or sometimes individually just working, not talking much, because probably they identified that bed 4 was the one that needed more help. So we are working now on how to automate this as well. And if this brings any ideas as well, I'm super happy to keep the conversation, because there are many things that can be done. And also because we learned that so it's really cool to work with this positioning sensors. I really love them. But so far, the hardware still is going to take some years until it gets more reduced and the installation is easier. So that's why most people are using video and audio, because it's just more scalable at the moment. So we are trying, because we have that positioning data based on sensors, wearables, as the benchmark or the baseline. We are also testing if computer vision can give us some estimate, and maybe at some point we can just use computer vision instead of positioning. And this is some work that has been led as well by a postdoc and a student, Jimmy and Xingyu. And by the way, the previous was by Linshen. And I present all these different images because it's a cooperative work, and it's really exciting to see all these students doing this work and postdocs. So what we are doing is also using epistemic network analysis with a different code book. In this case, it's more about task prioritization, knowing if certain teams are focusing on the primary task, if they're collaboratively in beds doing the primary task, which is bed 4, and so on. I'm not going to go that deep into these codes again. It's really harder to digest too many codes. But what I can say is that we are seeing differences as well from this positioning data, and also from the estimates from computer vision. What we are seeing is that we should be very careful when we work with data. Even X and Y coordinates can give us a lot of meaningful information, and we know a little bit. So this brings lots of implications in terms of ethics. If we are using multimodal analytics, even data that seems that it doesn't happen, doesn't matter if we capture that data, it doesn't say much about the person. It does, even X and Y data. That's why we went and focused a lot of X and Y data, because we thought like, oh, it's very simple data, but it can give a lot of information about what well, at least in educational terms, what the students are doing or not, and high effective teams, and we can see that reflected. And we can imagine if we get GPS data about people, there's so many things that can be investigated. So there's lots of ethical implications in that sense. So just to wrap up, and maybe we have some minutes to have a quick chat. The first takeaway message is a human-centered approach is critical in the design of any educational technology. But when we are talking about data, AI, now AI, and ChatGPT-3 and all the ones that are coming are opening all this umbrella of potential misuses, and especially in learning analytics, we are talking about in multimodal, where we are talking about sensors and computer vision. These tools can become surveillance tools if we don't also design the uses and the framework around the use of them. It can easily go into surveillance, into using the data for punitive reasons. And we need to understand as well that humans are very complex. So even if we get lots of sensors, we only get a glimpse of certain things and their limitations. In terms of multimodality, I know that some of you are working with multimodal data, but I feel like multimodality sometimes is just seen as using sensors and more data. But I feel like the other side of the coin is simply embracing that the fact that humans are complex, and that changes. Instead of thinking about the sensors, is thinking about the complexity of the human activity. And then if we need a sensor to get more data about learning, when the students is working in this tool or not, then it will come naturally. So for me, multimodality is more about the multimodality of interaction rather than multimodality in data channels. And the third message, which is about data storytelling, and I bring back the Yuval Harari's quote, where he mentioned humans think in stories rather than in facts, numbers of equations. And the second part actually was the simpler the story, the better. And I think this can help in the design of these dashboards that that people are trying to push into educators and learners to make them very simple, but at the same time, being careful about that story. That story has power, and if it goes into misleading potentially the educator and the student, then it can be damaging. So yeah, but I guess we can have some chat, try to compress it. But thank you so much again for the opportunity to have a chat about this cool research.
Thank you very much, Roberto, for your presentation. Now we will continue to the question and answer session. So if you have any questions, you can send them through the chat, or you can raise your hand and ask them through the microphone. Héctor, Héctor?
Thank you, Roberto. Very, very impressive work you have done. And it makes me think, how much time did you invest in designing the experiment and setting up the scenario? And then, how many time have you spent with how?
I missed the last bit. I think the voice was breaking. The last, yeah.
The first question is how much time did you spend preparing the experiment, setting up experiment? And the second, how many researchers and for how long did they work analyzing this data?
Yeah, thank you, Hector. It's a big effort. It's very collaborative. That's why I put all the faces there. It has been mainly led by PhD students, but in the main study, which is this one about using all these trackers and in the nursing scenario, that one has been big. But we do this study once per year because there is an opportunity for focusing on one simulation, and it happens for 5 weeks. It's very intensive, and we form a team of 5 to 6 postdocs, myself, and PhD students who go there, and it's far away actually. So it's time consuming. And then what the strategy we've been following is that PhD students lead different lines of research according to their interests. So then the analysis is like distributed among themselves. So it is time consuming. It has been time consuming. It's harder than doing online learning research, because in online learning you just harvest the data and that's it. So I feel like it works mainly because the context is for this particular context. It is important to train nurses and provide them with better tools for reflection, but yeah, it's time consuming. As well, it has been a kind of like this setup has been the culmination of other attempts for a few years with other students and we didn't know exactly how to set it up in an easy way. And now it was more like, okay, if we're going to do it, let's do it right. Let's build an infrastructure that captures all that information, and it's freely available as well. So so others don't need to go through that. It's just in terms of plumbing all the sensors. I think it works well.
Thank you. Congratulations again.
Thank you very much, Luis Fernando.
Thank you very much, Roberto, for this wonderful presentation and for joining us in this seminar. I wanted to ask you something related to a slide you had before, where you showed the different, like the most popular modalities that are being studied. And I would ask, like, which would you consider is like right now the frontier at the I mean, like the most number of modalities being used in the best studies? Is it 3? Is it 4? Or how many?
That's a good question.
You're the frontier. You're using 3. You're using voice. You're using location, and you're using arousal or EDAs. But
Yeah,
I haven't seen many studies with more.
yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. We didn't check on that. Did we? Or maybe we can check. Yeah, we have the at least from our literature review, which now is 2 years old. I think there will be for collaborative learning in a physical space is one of the ones that have more. But I guess for single user, single learner in front of the computer, I think, like for example, the one that you're doing, it has more, I think, because it has the logs, the speech, it has the face, it has the electrodes. So I think there are more in that kind of scenarios. But in collaborative learning, this is one of the ones that have the most. Yeah. But I don't know. That's a good question.
I mean, thanks. The question is I mean, pointed to the thought that if we're going to translate this sort of experiments and scenarios to classrooms, it would be like, would it be necessary to have that many like sensors, or it could be like summarized into 2 or 3 sensors and get the same results? I think like a second question would be, I mean, is it relevant enough to study each of these modalities independently, or do you precisely require their fusion and combination to get like a better robust result?
Yeah, I guess it all depends on the task and the context. So regarding the first one, yeah, I totally agree. We don't need that many sensors. And actually, we have a similar project with the starting maybe next year with the EEG sensor, ECG or EEG. Well, the electrodes, and yeah, this was one of the conversations. Like, are we envisaging to have that in the classroom, or is more to validate certain things, or so I think it all depends on the context. And the same with the fusion. We haven't done much fusion of data. We have been doing lots of analysis of space, and then a little bit of voice. We're just starting to scratch the surface, but I think it all depends on the intention. If it's also the task is more like predictive modeling, then it makes sense to do a data fusion. We haven't done much predictive modeling just because we in the past we didn't have much data. It's really hard to get even one of these teams. So our data set is just starting to get big enough to start to train some models, and then it makes sense to do data fusion.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alejandra?
Yeah, I was asking something about folksonomy. I mean, you showed us some data about bed 2 and bed 4 and some interactions or tasks, and can they be like classified with some kind of folksonomy, so it would be better to trace them, which are more important actions or activities than others?
Yeah, thanks, Alejandra. Yeah, I didn't know about folksonomy. I just Googling it. Which I understand is like tagging, like tagging data.
It's tagging, yeah.
Yeah.
In IT and knowledge management.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. That's what we sort. I mean, we don't do this at the level of public tagging. But we, for positioning data, is just pretty much having a template, and when someone moves to one side, then depending on the position, and some things are fixed in the environment, some other things are moving. So we end up with kind of doing an automated tagging based on rules, not based on people's tagging. But it's very interesting to see, to figure out some other ways, especially with other data sets that are bigger, maybe.
Thank you very much. Since we are running out of time, that was the last question. We would also like you to help us answering this questionnaire. Your feedback is very important to all of us. I already sent the link of the questionnaire through the chat, or you can access with this QR code. Now, Luis Fernando Moran is going to present to us about the experiential classroom of the Institute for the Future of Education.
Thanks, Luis. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly share that at the IFE Living Lab and Data Hub, we have a project called the IFE Experiential Classroom. And we would like to share that the first instance or the first experiments of this experiential classroom are already taking place at a small scale at a little space that we call the Multimodal Learning Analytics Lab. And it's located here in Campus Monterrey at the Centrales Norte building. And well, it's a project by the IFE, which consists of the equipment of a learning space with different multimodal technologies. So eventually we'll be incorporating depth cameras, microphones, site trackers, vice sensors, etc., to capture and analyze different factors and interactions involved in learning activities. So it's completely related to what Roberto just presented. We dream of having the same kind of projects that he's already developing. But since we've already started with some devices, we invite you to contact us in case you're interested. If you're here in Campus Monterrey, that would be also a plus, because you could even experiment with these devices here in this room. And we'll continue to grow. We'll continue to incorporate more and more technologies, and we'll eventually have this IFE experiential classroom in the 4th level of the expedition building, which is being built right now here in Tec de Monterrey, Campus Monterrey. So there we have an image of actually Luis, the presenter of this seminar, doing a little experiment where he's using a neuronal activity headset. His face is being coded by a camera in front of the computer, and he has a physiological tracking through a wristband. So we invite you to contact us, to reach out because we're looking for collaborations, right? As Roberto mentioned, these kinds of projects involve a team of researchers, a team of pedagogical designers, a team of developers or maybe programmers. So if you're interested in performing this kind of experiments here at Tech or with Tech, feel free to send an email or visit our webpage, which is ifellldh@.tech.mx.
Thank you very much. We would also like to invite you to our next seminar, Virtual and Augmented Reality, Future Technologies in the Present of Education, on March 24, 2023, presented by this EdTech Cerex. You can find more information about the seminar on our webpage. And also you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find this one and many more seminars that we already had. So like these 2 that we had just on November last year. And that would be all. Thank you very much to all of you who joined us today.